Welcome to Echoes, a Sumo History podcast. I am Nathan, and this is Tadashi. I just got home from work, and he thought I should get in full arch-villain mode, and so he's just claiming me. I have a puffy gray cat that would probably be better suited to this, but he's not as snuggly. So we'll just have to settle for the gray tabby. Introducing my other collaborators here, because he's kind of useless. Jake
still gets an executive producer credit. You know, it's really easy to get those.
Yeah, we'll just hand that out. Like 12 people, all my cats. So go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I'm Jake of Iowa Sumo Club and the Grand Sumo Breakdown podcast, and a big ol' history nerd. So yes, I am excited for another. I'm just going to let you get into it. I have no idea what time period this one's covering, other than what we've covered so far. So yeah, this is a total blank for me. I'm very excited to get into it.
Wild ride. Wow, kind of wild, nerdy wild.
Yes, the kind of wild that I'm here for.
Yeah.
Yes.
JJ.
So I am JJ Jones of San Diego, Honu Sumo co-founder. I think that's a cool title. I am also probably the guy that's going to add in miscellaneous ads from the echo chamber.
Hey.
Yeah, it took me way too many different recordings to figure out that name. But yeah, I'm here and surrounded by amazing gentlemen that are, like really awesome. These two.
Yes, we have an excellent team, and I also appreciate that we've kind of expanded in the background as well to like get some more people to collaborate on stuff that they've dug up. I'm sure the stuff that we got just today before we recorded will make its way in here eventually. But yeah, we've got extra collaborators. The more people that hear about this and contribute to it, the more cool stories, the more cool threads we have to pull.
Yeah, like a little bit behind the curtain, like we just posted our first couple episodes. So, you know, the people who are interested in this sort of stuff watching it are starting to like chip in with like local story connections they've made. And they're kind of seeing what we're really trying to do with this. And so it's generating excitement within our little sumo bubble. Mm-hmm. So it's cool. I'm happy. It's cool stuff.
100%. And what's really cool is I've been getting phone calls from, certain club members, like North Carolina, and people being like, "Is there any sumo history in my area?" It's like, "Oh, there is. We just need to figure it out. We just need to dive into it, and it's there."
Yeah, and I think, what we'll find is that there's going to be some sumo history that may not have existed in a certain area at a certain point, but that there's totally a potential that things go back kind of deeper, or there was like a little flash of something that popped up at some point. And so we'll get to that. I think in the course of this, some of it we'll get to in the course of this series. I know our stories at the very least will take us back to Japan, to Chicago, to Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Minnesota. We're gonna kind of be going on, all over the place with just this series, and then I think we have enough for future series too. So
it's one of those things where we cover, let's say, a dozen stories in one episode, and that pulls the thread on 24 more. In particular, I'm really enjoying this, that most of my podcasting so far has been like current events or, just talk radio kind of style stuff. And this like investigative, actually digging up new stuff is like, that's new to me. And it's a wild ride that I'm enjoying. But at the same time, there's this little bit of like, this won't end, right? Like at the rate we're going, like it's expanding faster than it's being covered.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. We got to get through the stuff that we know so that we can get to the new stuff we've discovered that we haven't outlined yet.
Yeah. And I think we started off our first episode, a couple episodes ago, talking about how we're kind of scratching the surface now. And there's some of these stories that we think there's enough content now on a particular story to do a podcast episode about it. But we also know there's stuff about that same story somewhere else where we could totally do a follow-up. Just because, it's worth getting the story out there. There's enough story right now, but we know we can flesh it out and still kind of craft a narrative out of it and make it interesting for folks. So yeah.
Hey everyone, JJ here from the Echo Chamber. Yeah, the nonprofit that we're going to be really focusing on this time around is the Japanese American Citizen League. They do a whole lot of different programs like anti-hate. They have scholarships, and a few other things. They've been around for, I believe, about 90 years or so, which is huge in the game of civil rights and such. So if you guys could please donate right around here. Boom, boom. I put it somewhere. I don't know. But if you can't afford it, at least spread the word. Whatever you can do to make sure that we're able to embrace the community, especially the community that we're focusing on in this project. It's huge. Every little bit helps, and it's a true communal effort. So please donate if you can. Again, if you cannot, if it's going to give you hardship or anything along those lines, just spreading the word of the Japanese American Citizen League, please. Bye.
All right. So what we're going to talk about today is kids these days. As older first generation Japanese American wrestlers, Ike, started getting their butts kicked in the dojo by their children, basically. And then the kids start taking over sumo. And this really kind of starts like in the late 1920s, really solidly by like 1929. And then we'll go through the mid 1930s. We'll kind of start off a little bit more in Northern California and then start pivoting a little bit more towards Southern California. And then in future episodes, we'll really pick up in the mid 30s, focusing on Southern California, not because that was the center of all sumo, just because we found some interesting stories there and found enough kind of in that whole era to have whole other episodes on Northern California. So today we're going to be kind of making that connection between the first generation toward fully entrenched second generation wrestlers. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The kids these days.
Refreshing my memory real quick on terminology.
Yeah.
Nisei is Japanese diaspora as a whole, right?
No. So Nikkei. No, it's okay. That's why we ask, and you ask, and I need to explain. It's fine.
The one that I just cannot keep a grasp on in the week between each recording, like which one is which term means which.
Yeah, it is literally a foreign language from English. So yeah. So Nikkei is the entire kind of Japanese diaspora. Okay. So like from Nihon. Nippon, Japan, right? So Nikkei are Japanese people, like the whole diaspora. But since we're mostly focused on California Nikkei communities, when I say Nikkei, I'm just narrowly talking about Japanese Americans in California. Mm-hmm. Nisei is second generation. So people who were born in the U.S. are U.S. citizens by birthright citizenship, which was settled law at the point they were born in the teens and 20s. Apparently, we're going to try to unsettle that law, but we live in interesting times. So, whereas Issei were first generation, so came to the U.S. from Japan, mostly in the kind of 1890s through 19-teens. And then Japanese immigration was cut off in 1924. And because of that, there's these like clear kind of age cohort bumps.
Gotcha. So yeah, today we're talking about transition to Nisei, the second generation, effectively.
Right.
Got it.
Within the Nikkei community. Yeah. So
got it.
Yeah.
One of these times I'll write it on a Post-it so I can remember it. Otherwise, everybody gets a refresher.
And that's fine.
At the beginning of the episode.
People don't have to watch these in order. They can just find these and watch them. It's fine. So yeah. So those are, some of those terms that kind of will keep coming up. So this transition toward the Nisei really starts in like 1928, where it starts a little bit before that even, where yeah, and there's a tournament in Fresno in 1926 where it's notable by the author of this article. It's like a 4th of July tournament in Fresno, that even some American borns participate. So this is before like Nisei becomes kind of the common terminology. And that actually evolves over time. So American borns, and which was very, gratifying to the author. That's how they put it, because a lot of Issei have been claiming that these Nisei were shaky and flabby muscled. So seeing the kids, like actually
flabby muscled.
Yeah, shaky and flabby muscled. And I was like, okay, like they're just not working hard. They're just lazy kids. They didn't have video games to make them do that. So how this was happening, I don't know. But
yeah, what are the kids doing in that? Is that like stick and hoop days, or are we like?
Yeah, this is the mid 1920s. Yeah, I mean, I think in one of our first episodes, we already kind of talked about how this like the kids these days thing is going back forever.
Every generation in the history of the world. Yep.
Yeah, it's like this unifying human theme. It's just fun to like read it and go like, oh yeah, I just heard somebody say that at work yesterday. Like, right? Age discrimination is wrong though. Okay, anyway. I took a training on that. Okay. So, yeah. So it's just funny that like this is starting even in some of the earliest articles. But over the next 2 years, clearly like a lot of Japanese wrestlers, Nisei wrestlers, more of them are growing up and getting involved in sumo. And then there start to be like two things that kind of start happening around the same time. There's these shihan, these instructors that come over from Japan. So there's two. One named Hanakabuto, Flower Helmet, who came over and taught in San Francisco. And then another named Koganeyama, who was training the LA team. There's actually a picture of him here on the right. And he's the guy who has the chonmage sort of pulled up. But he's a pro sumo wrestler who came over to teach in LA. This is a picture of him actually up in, I think, when he was visiting Sacramento. He's visiting Sacramento because Toshuzan, who is the Sacramento kind of yokozuna at the time, is there sitting on the bottom right next to Koganeyama.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is Sacramento. So he was just visiting, like just coming through for kind of like a JACL. And but there's several news articles that start talking about like the caliber of sumos improving. And then the other is there's like a bit of we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get down to LA. So this trend of sumo kind of upping its game, and the caliber of sumo really kind of rising up.
Feels very similar to where US Sumo is today, where we occasionally have like an ex-pro come like to the Dallas tournaments, the Austin tournaments, like the Wakanoho in Florida. Like, yeah, that's really cool. That trend of like, maybe some cool stuff's going on here. Maybe let's call the celebrity to come visit, and hey, you miss all the shots you don't take, and somehow now you have pro sumo wrestlers coming every year to America.
Yeah. It is one of those wild, almost like life lessons I've taken from getting involved in sumo a year ago. Is I'll just ask. Like, it's a weird, obscure hobby. Who might be interested? I'll just ask, and it's shocking how many people are like, "Oh, that's actually interesting," or "Here's what I can provide you," or "Here's how I can help." It's kind of surprising. Whether it's like, hey, we want to do a demo somewhere, or whatever. Like, it's weird. Like, made it okay for me to I'll just ask.
Yeah. Or just shoot a DM over to Konishiki and he replies,
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah. So in Southern California, there starts to be a shift. Oh yeah. So narrative makes sense. So it's almost like I built this narrative and I decided to tell the story this way. I just forgot I built in the segue.
Wow. Whoever wrote this was really on his game.
Yeah. He just not live on his game, just prepped on his game. So Yeah. So in LA around the same time, the Nanka Sumo Taikai starts happening. So that's the Southern California tournament. But then the Beikoku Sumo Kyokai, the American Sumo Association, which was started in 1925, during its early years really focused on like exchanges with Japan specifically, like have a middle school group come over, have some university sumo wrestlers come over. And that was kind of their beginning. And then like as more Nisei started to get involved in sumo in America and started coming of age, they went, well, let's start emphasizing actually growing Nisei sumo here. And, like really focusing on training up, Nisei wrestlers in America. So they start having the Southern California tournament, the Nanka Sumo Taikai. And then they also, and Taikai is the word that's used in almost all these papers for tournaments, even in the English language papers. Well, they call them tourneys or tournaments or meet, all kinds of things, but Taikai.
Nanka is... So there's the Judo Federation for SoCal is called Nanka. Also.
Yeah, Nanka is SoCal. Yeah.
Oh, that means SoCal.
Mm-hmm. And Beikoku is America, basically.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's like there were these terms created for parts of California in like Japanese American Japanese. Yeah. So So Nanka is Southern California. Mm-hmm.
I've been connected to this Udonshikai for so long, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
I learned the basics of North and South in Japanese because I'm a huge fan of Fist of the North Star.
Oh,
so yes, I had a clue that's where that was going.
Yeah, well, and Japanese has like so many different ways to say the same thing, but also it's phonetically poor. So you'll be like, hey, that's like hana. It's like not flower as in nose, or that's like hashi, like bridge. No, it's like chopsticks. Sorry. Like, so
that's kind of a throwing stones from a glass house when we speak English,
that's true. That's true.
Our language as a
flour.
Oh, you mean what you use to make bread? No, no, the thing that grows outside and smells pretty.
Yes. Yeah. In Japanese, there's a lot of, I forget which are it sounds the same, but it's written in Chinese characters differently, but transliterated the same way in English. Anyway, that's the
homophone is something that sounds the same. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, homophone. Yeah. The Nanka Sumo Taikai starts happening, and then they decide to start actually having an all-state tournament. So in the late 1920s, there start to be all-state tournaments. I think the first one is in 1928. In the summer of 1928, there's an all-state tournament that happens. What is cool for me, just as a adopted San Diegan, or rather, I adopted San Diego. I don't know if San Diego adopted me.
Take you.
Oh, I appreciate it. You speak for all San Diegans.
Yes,
okay.
Especially on June 1st.
Okay, all right, official. I'm glad you've embraced your day. There is a JJ Jones Day in San Diego, June 1st.
Of course.
Yeah. For the first, 6 months of it, JJ was like, "Oh, please don't bring it up," and now he's bringing it up on his own. I'm glad you've embraced it. So San Diego actually wins the 1929 SoCal tournament, not the all-state, but does win. And like we talked about in an earlier episode, a lot of these competitions are very team-based. They're team-based tournaments. And then there'd be like a prize for whoever won the most matches or won the largest percentage of matches. But it's really focused on that's how most of the scores are reported out and things like that is team wins. So each city would kind of send a delegation. In some of these early tournaments, they don't necessarily talk about the format for those, but during the later ones, it's interesting that the format is that there'll be 4 Northern California teams and 4 Southern California teams that will represent and then wrestle each other. And it'll be kind of all the Southern California wrestlers will wrestle everybody, kind of like the Grand Sumo Torikumi, where it's east versus west, but it was north versus south, where
Sure.
all the Southern California teams, and then whichever Southern California or Northern California team won the most, it would win. And then they'd also report out whether North beat South or South beat North. I think the weirdest is in a future tournament, there's a half score. I don't know how you have a half, like 47 and a half wins in sumo. And they don't really talk about it. I'm like, what? Huh?
Yeah, more than almost any other sport, sumo is like extremely binary. That's very interesting.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't even like close, and they needed a tiebreaker. It was just
Yeah.
it was a blowout. Northern California just trounced Southern California. It's annoying. We'll get to talking about that one in the next episode. It's a little annoying, but I was just like, and also annoying because I can't find the answer. Like, why? How do you have a half, like a half win in sumo? But like, I don't know, it's pretty consistently showing up there. So yeah, there are these sumo tournaments that are happening kind of regionally all over the place, and from a lot of the pictures that show up, you can see these are younger, like teenagers that are doing sumo, and then you start seeing the guys in the 40s and 50s in the background, who are the Issei, who might have used to wrestle, but now they're coaches and managers of the teams, or proud dads of the younger wrestlers. So. And then in 1931, there's another big tournament in Fresno that this is a picture recently just kind of made public by the Japanese American National Museum. And this was something I got like ridiculously excited about. I think it was like the night after we finished recording, like a few weeks ago, where like all of a sudden all of us like 40, 50 plus sumo pictures suddenly became available again. And I got super ridiculously excited. And this was one of them, of this sumo tournament in Fresno. But this isn't the same tournament, but one of the things I found interesting is in July of 1931, there's a thing in the San Francisco paper, the Nichibei Shimbun, about how in Sacramento there's going to be a tournament on July 4th, and there's going to be an American son of Sacramento, who's the son of like the local rec department. So I don't know if he just saw like local Japanese kids doing sumo in the park and got interested or what, but he like started doing sumo. And the author of this article is like talking about how like jujitsu is known to the local like kind of white community. They know about jujitsu, but sumo is kind of a novelty. And then the other thing is that there was this other person who I haven't been able to confirm who it is. The name kind of shows up, but in like different transliterations, but Hitachidake, but I've also seen it spelled like Shitachidake. And then I've also seen other versions of his name with like whole syllables missing. So I haven't been able to find him. But he was apparently a grand sumo wrestler who came over and was teaching in 1931. And he was teaching him the 48 trick plays of sumo.
That's such a like 1930s newspaper headline sounding phrase.
Yeah. And I'm like, what are the 48 trick plays of sumo?
Is that how many official kimarite there were at that time, maybe?
Maybe? I don't know. Oh, that does remind me. I found this weird document that I didn't figure out until now, until my ADD just went to work, of this like translated sumo encyclopedia.
Cool.
Translated into German by a German guy who got captured during World War I and was in a POW camp in Japan for like 2-3 years during World War I. And then he watched sumo and got obsessed with sumo and like learned Japanese and like translated. I can send you guys the link. I can put it in our bibliography that we're making, but it has like pictures and drawings and all kinds of stuff. But there were these sumo taikon that were like encyclopedias that might be like a history of local sumo or a kind of sumo traditions, but also it would have like illustrations of like throws and all kinds of stuff like that, or rituals.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I couldn't quite figure out a way other than my ADD just went to work. But I think I found that because I was like, what in the world are the 48 tricks of sumo? And I was like looking for old like sumo books that were somehow translated into English. And so I found this, and it has been since translated into English. So, from Japanese to German to English. So I'm sure there's no weird translation things that happen in there.
Sounds like the Bible.
Yeah, well, I kind of think of the same thing. Like, right, spoken in Aramaic, written down in Greek, then written into Latin, then translated into Old English. Not
several thousand years of playing telephone. Yeah.
So went down a whole other nerdy rabbit holes that I was like, wow. Okay.
One thing I can confirm it is not is an official list of Kimarite. Because those were not even standardized until 1935.
Okay.
So they have modified the official list several times, but I don't have. It would take some deeper digging to see exactly how big the list was at a given time.
Yeah. So I tried to do a bit of digging, but I wasn't able to find.
Yeah. Either way,
that much on it.
Either way, very cool. Sounds like sounds like maybe he'd teach like Otsuke, here's one belt defense technique, here's one of my trick plays of sumo. And but regardless, that's kind of funny and also kind of not surprising that if a white person shows interest, now it's got to get in the paper.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also does show something kind of interesting. Sorry, archvillain, take two. So 20-pound cat is also what it kind of says a little bit about like self-identity, even within the English language papers of these newspapers, because a non-Nikkei person is described as American, like where American equals white, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of shows a slight window into that kind of internalization of kind of the caste system of America and what's defined as kind of like, I can't do rabbit ears, but normal American.
And 100 years ago, things were obviously quite a bit more pronounced in that regard.
Yeah. So the other thing that I thought was just interesting, we could just leave this slide up just as we talk about it, or you can take it off. It's up to you. But if people just want to peruse the picture, but I think
in there,
there's a lot to take in. The image quality isn't fantastic, just because it's like a scan of a scan. But I hope to go be able to take a look at the real thing soon. But in 1933, I don't know if this is sumo related, but it's local to San Diego. Somebody wrote a letter to kind of the editor of the one of the LA newspapers, and in it talked about, it's definitely martial arts related. So an anonymous rep of the Nisei youth in San Diego wrote this letter asking for the restoration of a mat that the Japanese Association had locked away and the youth were wanting to have access to and have it like restored and repaired. And I think this is the weird thing is like, then you have this like Nisei person then basically doing their own kids these days. Because if they don't, the kids will just be out in the theaters and pool halls, like we'll run amok if we don't have this way to entertain ourselves,
When you say mat, are you talking like a wrestling mat?
I don't know. Like, so this is the thing about a lot of these like English language sections in the newspapers is that some of the articles, especially like this type of column, appear to be like unique to the English language sections where their main target audience is the second generation folks, like is the Nisei. But sometimes there are things that also are in the Japanese sections in the newspaper, because most of these newspapers are like 8 pages and there'll be like 6 pages in Japanese and then 2 pages in English.
Okay.
And that kind of continues all the way until World War II. So in a lot of the sumo writing, sumo wrestlers are referred to as either mat men. Sorry, I got to do the bunny ears now that I don't have a cat taking up my arms. But mat men or sumoists. That's how they're usually referred to.
That's an awkward word.
I kind of want to be referred to as a sumoist.
A sumoist, yeah. That was how, especially, well, and different newspapers did have different conventions, but the Kashu Mainichi in particular in LA would use sumoist a lot.
That
And
almost
so
sounds like a path that you follow, a spiritual, a name for the faith of sumo.
yeah, maybe it's like, yeah, right, it's a practitioner, right, of sumo.
The sumoist, the way of Shiko.
Yes. Oh yes, I'm a man of faith. I am a sumoist.
Yeah. And what like doesn't quite make sense to me, and it makes me think it probably is like judo related, is that the where most of the sumo happened in San Diego at that time was either out on the beach on, well, like a picnic out on Coronado, or the Silver Strand, or the other thing is there was a vacant lot behind the pool hall in downtown San Diego, in the gas lamp district now, at Fourth and Island. There was like a pool hall right there, and behind it there was a vacant lot. And so there's these like fun there were these fun oral history stories from in the local historical society of, you know, people being interviewed in the 70s and 90s talking about how when they were kids they would like fight, you know, rival gangs of children of other ethnicities in that vacant lot. And then whenever somebody like wanted to like raise funds for something, they'd be like, they just put up a doyo and like invite. And like they said that especially like the Issei, and then, oh, another term I'll need to define, kibe, it was like catnip to them, where they would just show up and, you know, spend money, and any like youth association could sell like hot dogs and soda pop and like make money. And yeah, but it was a lot of the consumers of sumo were still either Issei or kibe. So kibe are people who were born in America, US citizens, but for some time, usually a few years, went to Japan. For whatever reason. So there were some kibe who their families went back to Japan after the 1924 exclusion of Japanese immigration, and their family, like their parents went, we're not going to stay in America. Like if we're not going to be able to build a future here, we're leaving. And they go back to Japan. And then sometimes the children of those folks or the parents would go, oh yeah, it's not any better in Japan. It's the Great Depression everywhere. Hit Japan too. And so they're like, no, let's go back to America. And, or at least the kids would go back to America. There was actually even a big recruitment drive to encourage kibe to come back to America. Their parents couldn't necessarily because they were first generation, but the kids would come back. And then there's all kinds of other reasons too. It was the Great Depression, so family businesses failed, or like a family illness. So it varied from family to family why families would send their kids back to Japan to like usually live with relatives or go to school for a while. But in Japan, they would get interested in sumo and martial arts and stuff like that, and they'd come back to America and they'd be into sumo, either to watch it or participate. So yeah.
It sounds like sumo is the excuse to have a festival type gathering where, you know, all the people that grew up with sumo in Japan, it's just a good cultural touchstone for everybody to get back together. And you said that this was often done as like fundraiser type things.
Yeah, a lot of times it was fundraisers. A lot of times it was fundraisers, and sometimes it would be, you know, so-and-so needs a little cash loan to do this thing, or other times it would be like we need to build a new roof for the Buddhist temple or whatever it would be. So it might be like building projects or things like that. Yeah. Or if there was going to be like we want to send the local kids up to a tournament and like a kendo tournament in Northern California or something, we'll do a sumo tournament to raise money for it. So like all kinds of stuff like that is happening. And a lot of times it didn't even kind of make the papers. But it is fun to see. We talked a little bit in an earlier episode about like picnic sumo, is that you'll see a lot of these like picnics that are being held, and there'll be this like a list of, you know, so-and-so is organizing the music and the fruit and then the sumo. And I'm like, fruit and sumo. Okay.
And that's the only place that word is mentioned at all, right?
Yeah. In that whole edition of the paper, it's like, and I'm, you know, like, oh, that's interesting. It's just, you know, some guy is like, all right, let's come on over and do sumo to kill some time, kids. Burn some energy off while we're out here at the beach.
And you're here 100 years later, like, tell me more. And like them in the moment, they're like, man, we did some sumo. That was it.
We're fun. At the beach. We did sumo. Yeah. So yeah. The other thing is like there's some of these articles that like talk a little bit about this weird like window into Japanese like caste systems and also like inner sports rivalries. And what's funny is like sometimes you'll read one paper, even the same section of a paper, and then 2 years later you'll look at the same section and it's like a totally different take on the same topic. So like and a lot of times they're like editorials, but they don't tell you who's writing it. You're like, why did you change your mind? Newspaper, like faceless newspaper editors. And so like there's one in 1933 where basically somebody makes the case that like when judo and jujitsu and sumo diverged during the Middle Ages, jujitsu was practiced only by the nobility. So that avoided the commercialization that was such a feature of sumo. And it also concludes the outcome of it was a great stimulation of true sportsmanship in jujitsu, not sumo. Sumo was like rough and tumble and brutal, and jujitsu was refined. And
this is the way that fancy men beat the crap out of each other.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just interesting. And then there'll be like another article that's like, no, sumo is the true Japanese spirit, and all these other things are popularized. Yeah. So, and it goes like the same paper will have like a totally opposite takes. But it's a couple years apart. Different people write. It's just It's like. But now I'm going back and I'm looking at all of them in a compressed time frame. I'm like, make up your mind.
Yeah, they're just trying to outdo each other at No True Scotsman. Just this is the true sport of Japanese head knockers. Like this.
Yep,
that's funny.
So, some of the earliest pictures I can find of these like all-state tournaments. It kind of sucks. These like all-state tournaments start in like 1928. And then the first picture I was able to find was in 1934. Hopefully there's more. But in 1934, there was a tournament in LA where there's a picture and you can see what the doyo looked like at there was a doyo permanently in Little Tokyo in LA. There was a Beikoku Sumo Kyokai building, and then behind it there was a doyo. And it was there all the time. That's where the LA club practiced. That's where almost all the tournaments in LA happened, was at this venue. And it's like this kind of vacant lot behind the building. And I think one of my favorite little details is there's other events that happen. So sometimes I'll be looking for it and I'll be looking for the word sumo, but it's infuriating to me because I don't care about judo, that they're having a judo tournament on the sumo doyo. And that's why shows up in my search is they're doing it at the sumo doyo. And I'm like, so a false alarm. But sometimes you find these cool little tidbits. So in like August of 1934, there's a reporter for the Kashu Mainichi watching a judo tournament, and he looks over in the crowd and he spots this little white guy watching sumo, and he's like, that guy looks familiar. Like, he looks really familiar. And then he like sidles over to him and he's like, you look familiar. And then he realizes, just put a little tiny mustache on him. And it was Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, that's cool.
So Charlie Chaplin is like at this sumo tournament. Judo tournament, watching it. And apparently one of Charlie Chaplin's, his like valet was a Japanese American guy. And so I don't know if he was like, hey, I want to go to the judo. Can I have the day off? And Charlie Chaplin was like, no, you can't have the day off. And I'm going to come along or something. I don't know. That's all made up in my head.
That's so cool though. Yeah. Like was he there to like support his assistant / friend or something? Or
I don't know. So I mean, he does like talk to him about what he's there, and he's like, "No, I'm just out, enjoying it." We're like, okay.
Man, I don't know enough about Charlie Chaplin to hypothesize any further there.
Really? So this is just a weird thing. Is like even in the 80s, growing up in Japan, Charlie Chaplin. I don't know why we had like Charlie Chaplin tapes on like beta. and
Sure.
and we'd watch them, and they sometimes like they were available in Japan. I mean, it's silent movies, right? So all you have to do is have a different card, for the captions that come
Oh
up every
yeah,
once in a
probably
while,
pretty
right?
easily to translate
Yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing.
So yeah, it's cool that he was there. So I grew up watching like Charlie Chaplin movies and loving
There's got
Charlie
to be
Chaplin.
some deeper connection because is it Takayasu even?
Yeah, he has a Charlie Chaplin Keshomawashi. Yeah,
Yeah. It's just like bright white and blue, I think, and just a big old Charlie Chaplin face on it. And I've never
Yep.
understood, but I mean, I haven't really looked into it either. But
yeah, I don't know who sponsored it.
There's got to be something there. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, I did find out a weird thing. Sorry, I have another weird side project where I'm obsessed with this one family that lived in Japan for a while in the 20s and 30s, and one of the guys talks. So there's this guy, a brother of this lady I'm interested in, who was like the distributor for Charlie Chaplin movies in Japan in the 50s. And I'm like, he's like the official distributor, and like there's these papers of contracts from the Charlie Chaplin estate. So anyway, like Charlie Chaplin keeps showing up. But so Charlie Chaplin movies were big in Japan in the 50s too. So the other thing that's interesting in here is that around the same time in 1934.
Sorry, gotta pump the
There we
brakes
go.
real quick, Nathan.
Yeah.
There's the picture.
Yep.
Oh man. All right. So another one. This is again another thread that we got to pull. I had not heard of this specific incident, but the May 15th incident was when, let's see, what year? 1932. The Prime Minister of Japan was assassinated.
Yes.
His son escaped. His son could have been a victim of that too. But he was away watching sumo wrestling with Charlie Chaplin, which is why he survived that day.
I did not know that. That's cool.
So yes, that one's going in the pile for further investigation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. Because I think there probably could be like tourists watching sumo in Japan, and kind of that that fascination too. Yeah. Totally could be a whole additional story. So yeah, well, and I think in our last episode we talked about like incidents that keep happening, like the Shunjen incident where there was a massive like strike in sumo, and basically 2/3 of the sekitori quit.
Right.
Over dinner. And started their own sumo association. So like that sort of thing happens. And in Japan, it's like an incident. It's like, no, that's like a coup d'etat. That's what that was. Or you assassinated the prime minister. Like that's an incident.
It
or
sounds very British, where like they're we're pinned down by enemy fire, but we're going to refer to it as a sticky situation. Like
right. Yeah.
Really underplaying the vocabulary.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, Charlie Chaplin. Look at that.
He's missing his little mustache.
Yeah. Wow. And and even then he looks so different because, he was usually wearing the hat and he'd have his, hair. This is later though. That's gotta be later.
This picture, the caption on the picture just says from around the time of the incident. So like, there's more to it.
Gotta be from the 50s. I think that picture has to be from the 50s.
Oh yeah. Just based on what Chaplin looks like. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I love Charlie Chaplin.
Oh yeah. No, they should probably get back on track for today's stuff. But yes, whatever this deep yet mysterious connection is between Charlie Chaplin and the world of sumo must be explored.
Yes, totally. So the other thing that happens around this time is there's a guy who comes through as another shihan that says that, if the American Nisei like train themselves for like 3 more years, I think they'll be able to take on like high school kids in Japan. Like if 3 more years. And just, not, I don't know, maybe it is a spoiler alert, but it's actually pretty close to what happens. Like, next episode, we're going to talk a bit more about like by 1937. Yeah, that's around when the group of California sumo wrestlers go to Japan, and they don't just beat high school, they beat like college level wrestlers.
Wow.
So yeah, but that's remarkably on track for like you like, oh, I think about 3 years, I think you'll all be there. And he was right. And then he said he was going to go talk to the Debanomi group and the Kasugano stables and talk to them about like prospects of Nisei going over to Japan. And then in a future episode that probably won't air for, a month or so, that does start happening in the mid 30s, is some Nisei start going over to Japan to try their hand at Grand Sumo. And the first is actually this year in 1934, but there's more that go over in like 1937, 1938. Yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah. And then from the same tournament, this is a picture that actually happened like this is a picture from like before the tournament actually started of the competitors in that tournament. So with the gyoji, it's a different angle of the doyo, and it's a crisper picture. And this is also a new picture that came up from the Japanese American National Museum. It's in their collection. And also I found a little bit more about like the format of that tournament, where they basically had the youngest wrestlers from Southern California wrestle. Southern and Northern California wrestle each other, and then they did like a next youngest, and then they did the kind of the young men, and then they did like the top wrestlers of Northern versus Southern California in that tournament. So yeah, and then they were going to have 64 wrestlers participating on the next day's kind of, I think it was the big kind of individual championship.
That's
so
like as big as nationals is now, and this was just the California tournament.
Yeah, so this is just the California tournament, and this is also just the best of Northern California being sent down, because I think I might have misspoken. So in the younger age brackets, it was like all the Southern California, like LA versus the rest of Southern California, and then they had Northern versus Southern California.
Okay.
So the Northern California was only sending their like top, whatever,
their
20
all-star
wrestlers.
team.
Yeah. They were just sending their top, 10, 20 wrestlers. And then there's this 64 wrestler kind of, open weight category that was happening. But yeah, you can see like Gyoji there, and you can see the what up, and it's really cool. And it's hard to tell like relative size of these guys, but the other thing that's striking is like they're not huge. There's maybe one or two guys who are slightly more fluffy than the average person, but the most are pretty slim, right?
Yeah, they mostly looked like jacked middleweights.
Yeah, well, and if we could like go back a little bit more, I mean, there's I think to like maybe the second slide where it's the Sacramento guys. Like
I was gonna say that one.
Like, and they have their arms crossed to maximize biceps, but like.
Yeah, but they didn't need to.
No, like these are strong guys. Yeah. So yeah, just going back to, and then we can go back on track. But so there's another Southern California tournament that happens the next year. I clipped out a section of this one because I want to save it for a future episode. But there's another Southern California tournament, and at this point, almost all the wrestlers involved are Nisei. And you'll see Gyoji and coaches who are Issei, a little bit older, but almost everybody is Nisei at this point. I think this might be the article. So around the same time, just a few months after this tournament, like maybe like 6 months after this tournament, there's a column in the Kashu Mainichi newspaper, the same one that before, that was talking about how sumo's like, so rough and tumble, and jujitsu is really where it's at. And this one talks about how it's like sumo has this like very definite philosophy and code of conduct,
Just
and
switching the narrative.
that it's really like all the gallantry, courage, and sportsmanship. It's a harmony between strength, spirit, and passion. And there's also a bunch of like Japanese business tycoons who lost their fortune gambling on it too. That happened too. So it's just weird, these articles that kind of go back and forth in the same paper. So this is the Southern California tournament in the summer of 1935. And these are the team champions. And we talked about it, I think, a little bit in an earlier episode, but there's start to be even more kind of classes from like A and B, A being like, older, more experienced, and early on, often Issei wrestlers, and then B being younger, late teens, maybe early 20s, the older Nisei. But then by the mid 30s, you start having C and D division. And so these like younger and younger divisions. Because I don't know, it's weird. For some reason, I kind of thought that by the time that like the big spike in Nisei birth was like in the teens or even in like around 1920 or so. But it's actually like the peak of that kind of hump was quite a bit later. So by the time World War II comes around, like the vast majority of Nisei are still minors. They're still young.
Oh.
Underage, and like the average age was like 16. So that means like a lot were born like in the 30s, so like little kids. So, which I don't know, as much as I've nerded out on kind of, Nikkei in America, not just sumo for a long time, I didn't know that. But I start seeing it in these pictures and seeing it in these kind of brackets. So pivoting a little bit more back a little bit more to like Northern California, but also to kind of show, kind of complete that generational transition, and also kind of like what Nisei being involved in sumo meant. In Cortland, which is up near Sacramento, and often the coverage and talking about this family just says they're from Sacramento, but they were mainly in the Cortland Sumo Club, but they did the tournaments in Sacramento and everything, is these 6 brothers who all did sumo, the Nishida brothers. So later, Tsugio, who is the second from the left, donated a whole bunch of pictures of Sacramento area sumo to the Japanese American National Museum in the 90s. And so this is the 6 brothers, and then I think the manager, Mr. Ikami, on the left, and then the Gyoji in the front left. And the Gyoji will be back. We'll talk about this Gyoji later.
I've noticed all the pictures of sumo groups tend to have a Gyoji with them.
Yeah.
Did these clubs operate kind of like how like Gyoji and Pro Sumo today are attached to one stable or another, even if they're not like training there, they're somehow attached to the stable? Or is it just this was the guy who ran the tournament as the Gyoji and he gets in all the pictures or something?
So it doesn't seem like it's club as much as it's like a league. Like, so the Northern California League had a guy, Teisuke Takahashi, who is the guy who went to Japan and got a Gyoji certificate and could use the Kimura name. He Gyoji'd as Kimura Teisuke. He was the Northern California Gyoji, and that's probably who this is. And then in Southern California, I can't find the name, or at least the first name. I haven't been able to yet, but it looks like his name was Kinjo. So who was the main Gyoji for the Southern California tournaments. And you can see him in different pictures. And then some Fresno tournaments, you'll see Kinjo off to the side, even though Fresno is Northern California. So he would travel up to Fresno to Gyoji. So yeah, for those who don't know, California, thank you. Fresno is like what we call Central California. It's in the Central Valley, which is like a heavily agricultural area. It's near like just west of the Sierra Nevada mountains, like near Yosemite. But it's flat agricultural land in the Central Valley. And this whole stretch just a bit north of LA, all the way up north of Sacramento, is a giant valley where the San Joaquin River flows from the south and Sacramento flows from the north. It's just this giant flat area that's like, once it was irrigated, great agricultural land.
Any other state, San Francisco and Los Angeles being like the 2 probably biggest hubs that people are familiar with in the state. Anywhere else in the country, that's like 2 entire states away. Just to the rest of the country, it's like, oh, you mean California, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to take a vacation to LA and I'll take a day trip up to San Francisco to see whatever, like these are, it makes a lot more sense seeing it like this, why Northern and Southern California are like separate governing bodies. They're looked at as separate, like, even though you got your local teams and whatever, your regional group is still completely separated from the other one on like a day-to-day basis, which is why it's a big deal when you have these big, full state tournaments.
Right. And why, sometimes the LA teams would go up to San Francisco. That was rare. I've only seen like 2 times, but Southern California, when they go down to the North San Pedro Street Sumo Doyo, that's what it's called in all the newspapers. They would send like, maybe 10, 20 wrestlers down.
Mm-hmm. We also have to think about transportation during that time.
Train.
Yeah.
That's not like a 3-day weekend where I have 2 days of travel like a normal amateur sumo tournament in 2025 looks like. That's a big deal. It's 100 years of progress in travel has gotten us to where we're at today. But 1930s, you're not just on a whim asking for a day off and taking a drive.
Yeah. And then there were, trains that would go down, and I imagine that's how a lot of people did it. But like, even now there's spots along the Grapevine, which is this thing where you drive from like the mountains north of LA, well, one of the many mountain ranges, and then you hit this place and you just drive straight down, and it's a crazy, I don't know, like 9% grade or something like that for miles and miles. And basically, if you're driving up it, they have spots for when your car overheats, that's still a thing. But imagine doing that in a car in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So yeah. California is a big state. It's a big state. And even now it takes, 9 hours of almost nonstop driving to get up to that area. And, with modern Eisenhower freeway systems. So, so these Nishida brothers, they are big in sumo, and one of the, I think, funniest references I found was that there was this tournament in San Francisco in 1937, where the 6 Nishida brothers, the strapping Nishida brothers, all wrestled, and then the author talks about how just every Issei father was just so jealous that to have 6 sons who were all into sumo, that would be, and the crowd was just so excited about, having these 6, Nisei young men doing sumo. But this article, if anybody wants to look it up, is actually like a weird treasure. It's like from January of 1937 in the Kashu Mainichi. And, it's actually a Southern California paper where one of their Nisei writers goes up to a tournament in San Francisco and covers this tournament and writes this whole big article about it and talks about these the fair ladies of Little Osaka's gay nightlife in San Francisco, which I have a feeling that's a reference to the red light district in San Francisco.
It's a heck of a phrase too. That's a good way with words from that guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then at the very end, he actually apologizes, that, I was just striving to bring a word picture of the event, but I'm sorry about the crude and offending phrases that I used. But they're the peculiarities attending this sport, Yeah, it's just a weird article. But he also talks about how it's funny that because it was this big tournament, all kinds of people were showing up to do it, and they were like Nisei who've never done sumo before. So they're trying basketball moves and football moves and tried it out on the doyo because they barely know how sumo works. So anyway, this is another thing that anytime we've had people kind of come in and just try sumo, it's like, okay, that's valid in that sport, but you're gonna have to adapt it a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's funny. As we've talked about before, there's people covering sumo who are used to covering other sports or other topics or whatever are in the 30s, the 20s, whatever. They're going to be very out of their depth if they don't already know what's coming. So things like that, those strapping lads is probably the most the most that author could like clutch their pearls and write something about these men wearing almost nothing, slamming into each other. Like that's, no, I am excited for more of the bibliography to get put together because I want to read some more of these, the full text of these articles. It sounds really interesting and entertaining.
Yeah, and what's great is that there are like every once in a while these kind of like colorful sorts of pieces, but a lot of it is just like, hey, the sumo club had a meeting, they're gonna have a tournament in a month, like
sure.
like okay, and
they're not all painting word pictures.
No. So the painting word pictures, whenever that happens, I'm like, oh, this is great. So the other thing for extra confusion, because we were just talking about like the 48 trick holds of sumo, is this one mentions nearly all the 96 recognized holds were used during the course of the tournament. So to the real, sumo aficionados, that's impressive. I was like, 96 recognized holds. Like, I don't know what that is.
The word recognized really makes it sound like we're talking kimarite there.
Yeah. But like kimarite then, like, what it was by the 90s, it was down to like 70, right? Something like that. And then when the Mongolians came in and blew sumo open again, then it was like, we'll add 12 more.
It's in the neighborhood though. So it feels like that's gotta be what they're talking about. Like, somebody who did know what they were talking about sumo would come in and say like, there's this many, how do I phrase it so that you'll know what I'm talking about? There's 96 holds in sumo, or whatever. That feels like it should fit.
Yeah, it feels like that. And it could also feel like, this guy who doesn't know sumo and he's in the crowd and he's like, what are these things? And somebody's like, there's got to be dozens of ways to do this thing. And like, there's this and that. And I'm like, how many are there? I don't know, 96. Like,
What are they announcing after the match ends? It's like, oh yeah, the kimarite. What? Yeah. Oh, the recognized holds. There's, exactly. It's somebody spitballing maybe.
Yeah. So I really don't, I don't know. Like, and it is one of those things that either, live and then we can edit it out if it disastrously doesn't work out because this isn't live, or if anybody in the comments has explanations, we would love to learn more about like, what are they talking about?
How many were there at a given time, I think is something that has to be researchable some way or another.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing that it could play into, because we talked about it a bit during the last episode on the kind of that connection and conversation between sumo in America and Japan and kind of the windows we can gain into Japanese sumo at the time, is Japanese sumo, there's things about sumo that are almost timeless, and then there's things about sumo that are not. Like, we think it's been forever, but it's like, no, that was like the mid 80s. Like when they said, no, you need to put both your knuckles on the ground, not necessarily at the same time, but you can't just stand up and run at the person. Like, right. That was like 1984 or 5, right? Like,
I think even in the 90s, weren't they doing the almost standing? But yeah, it's to your point though, like, it's recent things that are like, the way that they currently do mono-ease and the way that they have video replay.
Yeah.
The video replay though, that was actually older than I thought. I think that goes back to like the 60s or 70s even.
Yeah.
But like, they change things all the time.
Yeah.
But they try to maintain the air of timelessness to the traditions of it.
Right. But we still see the ways that it's like, oh no, this is the same, this is one of those, like, they still use fax machines in Japan moments where like I am entertained that when they do the morei, it's still a corded mic. And going up there and they have to work around it. I'm like, really? You can't, you got to use a corded mic still? Like, okay.
I have no idea. Well, I mean, I have a little bit of an idea of how true this is, but sorry if I've said this one before, but I heard somewhere that Japan has been living in the 2000s since the 1980s.
Yeah.
The fax machines is always the one that blows my mind, that like, that's still completely commonplace.
Yeah.
Just everywhere in Japan.
Yeah, that was the weird thing about, like, I came to America in like the late 80s and I came over here and people are like, there's these new things, CDs. I was like, you guys are just getting CDs over here? Like, okay. Sure. But then, right, not a lot changed since then. Except smoking. Like, I don't know, smoking has like plummeted in Japan. That's like the most massive change. Almost everybody who was like in Japan in the 80s and 90s and then goes back later is like, where did all the smokers go? They're in a weird little pen. That's what happened.
Probably best for everybody, but probably also a very stark change that is immediately noticeable for you.
Yeah. It's weird. So a couple more things I wanted to kind of show before we kind of move along. One is, I think I talked a little bit about earlier episodes. I talked about Toshuzan from Sacramento, the Sacramento Yokozuna, and how he had a keshomawashi with a tiger coming out of bamboo on it. It was like in display in shop windows before tournaments. And then after his death, what happened to it? So there's the keshomawashi of Toshuzan on the right in about 1928. On the left, there was a big popular wrestler who is mentioned lots of times in newspapers in the Sacramento area named Asahiyama. He was big in the mid 1920s, and then in the middle is a picture of Mitsuga Hamanaka. So I think Mitsuga Hamanaka is enough for I think have 1 or 2 episodes about him in a future series on Northern California Sumo. Nice. He's a big deal, and there's a lot about him, and he lived well into the Dainese and donated a whole bunch of stuff to the Japanese American National Museum. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff about Mitsuga Hamanaka. So there's these 3 keshomawashi, 2 of them from the 1920s, and then there's Mitsuga Hamanaka. And then, JJ, could you go to the next picture?
Oh, man.
This is 1938.
That's awesome.
So there's the Asahiyama, there's the Toshuzan keshomawashi, and then there's Mitsuga Hamanaka's keshomawashi. So
our guy on the left is the sword bearer. So this is like a Yokozuna Dohyo Iri.
Mm-hmm. And Mitsuga Hamanaka he's from Fresno, but he was the Northern California Yokozuna in the mid 1930s. And he also wrestled for like a pro wrestling outfit in LA, out of the Olympic Auditorium in LA, awesome. Run by Lou Carnation Darrow.
It's a pro wrestling name from the 1900s, as if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, and he'd always wear like a carnation in his lapel. Yes. And then when he came back from Japan and had seen sumo and thought it was super awesome, he switched it to I forget if it was like a chrysanthemum or something. And just as maybe we should change his name to Chrysanthemum Darrow. It's like in the Japanese newspapers.
Doesn't roll as well, but I understand what he's trying to do.
Right. He's like, and so he, for 6 months, he tried to boost, I'm going to bring sumo to America. And then by the new year, it doesn't happen. And then all the Japanese
never heard that one since then. Never heard that timeline, that exact story happening every couple of years in the States.
Yep. And then, so the Japanese newspapers are like, funny how that didn't happen.
Didn't change his name to Chrysanthemum.
Nope. Just he should have done that. And then this Gyoji also looks very much like the guy who's in the picture with the Nishida brothers.
Hey,
I think that's probably Kimura Teisuke. That's awesome. Yeah. I haven't seen any pictures exactly. It's just there's too many kind of stars aligning of kind of the same guy. And then there'll be one more I'm going to show in a later episode that for me kind of clinches it. It's like triangulation.
Okay.
Anyway, so I just love that there's this kind of continuity of these. These are Nisei wrestlers. Mitsuga Hamanaka, he was Kibei Nisei. So he went to Japan as a kid and actually lived in Japan for quite a while and then came back to the US. So then the other thing is, just connect a few dots, is by the 1930s, there's also dan and ranking systems. And then there's a little bit of a window in how these class A, B, C, D, and then now even E younger wrestlers are starting to show up. So in 1938, there were all these rankings being handed out. And then, kind of preview of a future episode, if you look at the first name in the class A,
Already
there.
saw it. I'm excited for that because you've teased that name a bunch of times here.
Oh, and I'll keep doing it until we air those episodes, because he's kind of a big deal in Southern California sumo. So yeah, Bud Mukaye. So he shows up as he's the captain of the Class A Southern California team. And then there was a Southern California tournament. We'll talk about that more in the next episode too, where Southern California comes into its own. So a couple other cool things that I found that are also just showing like this ongoing involvement of, you know, kids, like young kids in sumo. This is a picture from about 1938. It's apparently, it's in the LA collection of like the LA County Public Library, strangely. But it's from sumo up in, I think, like the Salinas Valley or something in kind of central coastal California. And so it's these kids, you know, like they just carved out a doyo in the, you know, middle of the dirt, and, you know, 6 kids ready to do sumo. But there's also like these weird, so one of the reasons I wanted to show this and kind of talk about like one other little article before we start winding down this episode is that one of the things that in what little previous work there's been about Nisei sumo in California was that it was kind of like driven by Issei. Like Issei wanted their kids to do it. You know, Nisei kids didn't want to be doing sumo. They weren't about it. It was like trying to force kids to do Japanese stuff when they really wanted to do all American stuff. And there's like an element of that because there's a lot of baseball and basketball and all kinds of other stuff happening. But there's also Nisei kids who wanted to be doing sumo, right? Both were happening. Some kids were doing it because their parents were making them. Some kids are doing it because they wanted to. So it's a bit more kind of a complex picture, right? If kids are just wanting to do sumo, you know, wherever this is, on Salinas Valley wouldn't be a beach, you know, but out in the field, right? But also a few years before this, in 1935, there's this little story about how the paper boys of the 2 Japanese newspapers in LA, the Rafu Shimpo and the Kashu Mainichi, played in a kasaba meet. Now, they don't mention what a kasaba meet is. I tried to find out. I think it's basketball. I think it's an old way of talking about basketball. It's the best I could figure out. But not like a cassava melon, but kasaba with a B. I don't know. But apparently, the Rafu Shimpo won. And after that, the Kashu Mainichi kids then said, like, well, let's do sumo. And they challenged the Rafu Shimpo delivery boys to a sumo match. And they say, like, all right, we're waiting. And then just ... So, like, okay, you're calling each other out. All right. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing that, like, it's, you know, young kids talking smack, right? Like, that's not necessarily their parents saying, like, hey, you know, I want you to be doing this, right? This is, you know, the LA, you know, Kashu Mainichi kids saying, yeah, but we're better at sumo. Let's do that, right? Mm-hmm.
That's really cool, though. Like, we don't have, like, you know, old tweets to see what people are actually saying to each other in real life, you know, like it's the stuff that you're mostly finding that has been passed down is like newspaper articles, things that were meant to inform or preserve information, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the little tidbits like that kind of unlock what it was really like for the people involved. And yeah, that just sounds like kids being kids. I love it.
Yep. It's a publicly calling them out. So before we go, like, let's not go to the next slide quite yet, because I want to say one thing before we get to it. Is one of the things that's like a constant theme in this is the things that are familiar and the things that are like super old timey. But then every once in a while I run into something that's like a human time machine, like a 1-person time machine that it's like, wait, what? How are these things, you know, like, that's, wow. Okay. That's still a thing. So if you could show the next slide. On the left, this is a picture in the Japanese American National Museum of 1-year-old George Ariyoshi in a keshomawashi. He later went on to become governor of Hawaii. And there he is on the right in a high rise in Honolulu, having his picture taken. He's 98 years old right now. He's still alive.
That's insane.
And this picture on the left was taken in like the mid to late 1920s when he was a baby.
That's so cool. This makes me think of like how, like in school, when you learn about the civil rights period, like a lot of stuff is in black and white, which kind of like makes you think that it's further back than it really was.
Mm-hmm.
When we absolutely have color photography from the 60s. Like, of course we did.
Yeah.
But like this, obviously we didn't have color photography, but the fact that we have one human that spans our story that we're talking about and is still around now, that's ridiculous. That does really hammer home that this isn't like, you know, we're not deciphering cave drawings or hieroglyphics or stone tablets or whatever.
Nope.
This is people that like his generation are the people we are talking about. And some of them are still around in 2025. That's nuts.
Yep. And then at the same time, you all of a sudden, when you look a little more closely in the picture on the left, you realize how bizarre things are and how old-timey it really is. Do you see what's just beyond his right elbow in the lattice work there?
No, what is that?
That's his mom holding him up.
Oh,
picture.
Okay.
Because the exposure is too slow. So you got to have somebody hold the baby up.
Oh man. You got to keep the baby still. You got to have, oh man, that's funny.
So like there's this whole apparently thing. I think weird shout out to if anybody wants to go on a crazy, YouTube deep dive on this show QI. Have you guys ever watched QI?
British show, right?
Yeah. It's like one of those comedy panel shows with all kinds of bizarre trivia, but they have a whole section about these like kind of early photography things of trying to take child pictures. So looks like maybe a child sitting on a couch, but it's really like their mom, like just with a black sheet over them, pretending like sitting in a chair. And then it's like, yeah, this child's just sitting by themselves on a couch. It's like, that's a head, like, and then a hand. Anyway, so this is, so I just love that his like mom is like peeking through the corner of this like lattice back of a chair and her arms reaching out, holding him up, like it's so, wow. It's the 1920s. And then
like she's
also
trying to hide, but like, is she bad at hiding, or is that part of the fun? Is that like part of the joke?
I don't know.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. So I just loved, this is another like picture on the left from the Japanese American National Museum. But it is one of those things like, this isn't ancient history. It's not ancient history. Mm-hmm. There are people from this era who were children whose like parents were big into sumo who are still alive. Right.
Very cool.
So yeah, it's wild. It's very strange stuff. And then just one final thing, just as we did talk about a bunch of like California geography and places, and then in the next couple episodes, we are going to start getting into kind of, World War II era. There's like a little snapshot map of what like the concentration of Nikkei communities in California were in 1940. So these the black sections on this map are areas where there's larger concentrations of Japanese Americans, and despite the color coding on the map, not like a majority. This was like there's a few thousand or there's 10,000 Japanese Americans.
Yeah, we're not talking like half of the population, but
no. Yeah.
Relative density. Yeah.
Right. It's just relative density. And so, the reason we talk about how LA is this huge center is this kind of Burbank, Los Angeles, San Pedro, bits of Orange County are a big concentration. There's a little bit more of a small concentration here in San Diego. But then in Northern California, you can see the blob of Fresno in the middle of the state, and then around Monterey and the Salinas Valley on the coast, and then San Francisco, Oakland, and then the San Joaquin Delta and Sacramento, Marysville, Walnut Grove, all these kind of towns in Northern California that had big Nikkei concentrations. So
Real quick,
Yeah.
California geography here. Is that Sacramento that is off of the coast? Like
So
the furthest north kind of blob?
it is the next to the furthest north blob. There's like a tiny blob above it that I think is Marysville.
Oh, okay.
It's the kind of, I don't know what kind of strange thing to describe it as, but I don't know. It looks like a seahorse almost shape.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
excellent work there. That's exactly, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. So that's kind of Sacramento going down to the San Joaquin Delta. So
Gotcha, cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of how Japanese American communities were spread through California. So especially Northern California, you can see why there's a lot of sumo wrestling in Northern California. And then in LA, it's much denser. It's very concentrated around LA. And then very sparsely populated in between.
See a little bit of San Diego down there. You guys are you guys are on the map at least.
Yeah, we're on the map down in San Diego.
Always on the map.
Always on the map. We even make the songs of all the important places in California. You got to at least have like Dago to the Bay. So. Yeah,
is
so
this some inside joke on the coast that I don't know, or some song?
You haven't heard the song?
No.
Oh man,
I'm California miles away from you guys. You guys barely exist to me.
I guess it would play on the radio here all the time because
every day, multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to play it for you sometime.
Well, I guess I can't imagine I'm really missing out too badly.
But no,
it's a great song.
It's a great
but
song.
We definitely can't do it on YouTube because they will take us down.
We can just make references, and then if I sang it, I don't think we'd infringe on any copyrights because
no.
But I know
I have learned that over years of trying to do fun stuff on podcasts is you can sing whatever you want, but if you use the audio that was produced by somebody else, then you get in tons of needless trouble.
Nope. Yes. And nobody wants me to sing. That's the other thing.
There you go. I guess we're in a pickle then.
Open to it.
No, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Any final thoughts from you guys?
No, I've go ahead, JJ.
So I just want to say that if you guys want to see footage of sumo before all the formalities and some of the other stuff, it's all online. I really like Shadi. Shadi has a really good YouTube video showing sumo in like the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. I would show it, but again, I don't want to take it down.
Link it in the description maybe.
Yeah, it's right down there. Or I forgot.
That has never happened to me before either. Of course not.
Go ahead, Jake.
No, I was just, I appreciate that we are, I don't know, it feels like there's more of a thread of history than I kind of expected. There's more of a digestible narrative here, and like the transition to the new generation really helps tie it to a timeline. And, that's one of the things that always makes history easier to digest is when you're talking about, a linear timeline and what happens here and what happens there. And it's not a clean break by any means, but like this transition period of generations feels very apt for like pro sumo right now, where we just got a new Yokozuna, where we have a lot of the old guard that have been wrestling since I started watching sumo almost 10 years ago. There's only a couple of them left. And we've had some generational turnover there too. So it's I just wanted to compliment your framing, your narrative here, that it's making it very easy to digest. And I'm loving all the pictures that you've been digging up.
All right, cool. Well, thank you all very much. We will wrap up this episode. Next episode, we will be starting to talk about one of the giants of Southern California sumo, the kingpin of LA sumo, Bud Mukaye. We'll start telling his story. We'll see if we can get it into one episode. but I have a hunch that's not going to happen because I started working on that story and I'm like, nah, that's going to be a couple at least. Plus we're doing an interview with somebody. I'm fingers crossed that's going to be cool. So yeah, we might have like 3 episodes just on one person, but we'll roll them out. So we're excited though. We're excited.
Hey, no pressure from anybody but ourselves to keep it short. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, if it takes more, it takes more. That's
Exactly.
cool. It's a story worth telling. So yeah. Well, thank you guys. Mata ne. Muted.
yeah, you're muted, JJ.
You waved.
You blew the sign off, JJ. We got to start all over.
No. From the
Ha